Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. The next letter comes from Matthew, and there are a few things I want to just say before we dive straight into Matthew's letter. Firstly, a trigger warning. This letter does involve themes of trauma, sexual assault, and also suicidal ideation. Secondly, I've actually read this letter out and did a recording on it, but I wanted to approach this a bit more sensitively. And luckily, Matthew at the same time came back and said, well, I actually got an update that I want to share with you. So it all worked out very well for everyone because now I'm going to reread this. And so even though some of my reactions to to the more shocking elements of this won't be as fresh off the cuff, I'll do my best to still share my reaction with everyone because there are some shocks and twists and turns in this letter. And I have to say, for everyone involved, Matthew, his ex, I am truly sorry because this is one of the most painful letters I've, read out. And for those of you hearing that, it is not to say that anyone else's experiences are less painful. It's just to say, hey, remember what I always go back to. We're all drowning here, no matter it be 3 feet below water or 9 feet. At the end of the day, we're all on our way to death. So I say that this is one of the more painful ones because there were just so many experiences in it that would understandably be the basis for betrayal, heartbreak, confusion, and it really was, as I was reading it, a series of mind fucks, left, right, and center. So, with that all out of the way, let's dive straight in. Okay, so Matthew writes, I was really keen to submit this letter to be read and analyzed. I live in Paris, so coaching might be tricky in terms of time slots, but happy to look into it. Okay, on this note of looking into counseling, coaching, or therapy, anyone is very welcome to do so. I am quite booked out as usual, but if any of you are looking to work with my team members, they're available as of like this week to take on clients, whether that be for coaching, therapy, or counseling, depending on what your needs are, we can help you out. All right. Secondly, in regards to Matthew's letter, let's continue. I've had the worst 6 months of my life through an avoidant discard. I, Matthew, was in a 3.5 relationship with the woman who is called Louise. I was absolutely sure I would marry this woman. The only doubt I ever had was that I wanted children and she wasn't so sure. However, in February of 2024, on our anniversary, she wrote me a long letter, which was 10 pages, saying how happy she felt in our relationship and that she could see herself starting a family with me. Okay, let's take a pause here. I do remember me saying this in my original recording. On one hand, it is always delightful and divine to have such a, protestation of love from a partner, particularly one who's just agreed that when you've had someone who is start saying, "Oh, I'm not really interested in having kids," to then go, into a 10-page letter detailing their love for you and then capping it off by saying, I could see myself having, kids with you. Beautiful. I mean, it's amazing. Who wouldn't want that? I mean, that's just a very beautiful letter. And also, I think it does suggest to me that there is a lot of genuine, feeling in there for Louise. There is a but coming to this, which is to say that that's a lot. 10 pages, for all of this around that time makes me think the reason why I'm getting a little bit sort of, I guess, suspicious of this is because even though this is a beautiful gesture, I find that this can sometimes categorically be in the realm of idealization. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, what's idealizing got to do with this when a partner is professing their love for someone they really care about? To which I say, yes, I understand romantic gestures, rings, gifts, notes, and physical affection, and all the, examples that are based on the five love languages. I get that. However, we have to remember too that there can be a realm of when it goes into the too much territory, and it might suggest the person is actually, having a very inflated, distorted view of their partner, which isn't accurate in reality. So why might a 10-page letter be a bit suspicious for me? Is it makes me think, is Louise really grounded when she says this? We all go through a honeymoon phase. I'm not denying that aspect, but it just seems like a lot. And I know this is a few years in, so this is 2024. So we're presumably at the 3-ish mark, I'm assuming. So yeah, I could see how this could be a natural build up, and that's a 10-page letter, and she's just like, yep, this is my, these are my feelings for you. But we got to remember that when things are extremely high in a relationship, the propensity for them to be extremely low might also be there. So there's that. And again, a lot of you aren't going to know this when you're in a relationship. You're probably going to think this is delightful. I've got nothing to worry about. And you shouldn't really have anything to worry about. This 10-page letter isn't in and of itself a red flag, but it does give me the sense that Louise might be, like I said, emotionally dysregulated in a moment of euphoria and may not be, you know, grounded with the reality of things. And also, can I just say, you know, if she's saying that she wasn't so sure about children, and now that she's starting to say that she could see herself having a family with you, that's a humongous life choice. And I'm not saying people can't change their minds, but that is a big one to be changing minds on. Anyways, enough dissecting that. Let's continue. After I received this letter, all my doubts were gone, and I began planning how and when I would propose. She brought up marriage and dropped hints often. We would tell each other, I love you every day, and we never passed each other in the apartment without a kiss or a playful slap on the bottom. Yeah, so see what I mean with regards to that 10-page letter thing before. There's already a lot of love making between the two of you. This is cute. This is beautiful. But on the other hand, it also makes me think, you know, I feel like for, Louise, a lot of this is if she is where I think if she's going in the direction that I think she's going in, well, I know because I've read this. To me, honest, like this is still sort of making me feel like she's caught up in the excitement of it all. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some other stuff going on behind the surface inside of her that she's not really addressing, like potential fear of getting close. Anyways, Matthew writes, I had no doubt that we were as strong as a couple. Yeah, well, reading this, I think the lay person could be forgiven for, for not thinking that too. I think on paper, it seems like you both are going great. While we had some small fights about her not being tidy, we never had any major problems at all. It is worth pointing out that she does have low self-esteem coming from a very distant father and a sexual assault by a neighbor when she was young. She did attempt suicide soon after this once, and I think suicide is very triggering for her. She also takes on responsibility for her brother and not protecting him from the father on one occasion when he got hit after she told him for taking her toy. Sorry, after she told on him for taking her toy. Okay, let's take a moment here. Like I said with the trigger warning at the start, there is a lot of stuff that Louise has experienced as a child. And so it sounds to me like there's a few things going on. There probably would be tremendous pain, trauma, and shame likely inside of her from the experience she suffered growing up because of the sexual assault incident. Two, she's no stranger to suicide and suicidal thinking. Three, taking on responsibility to protect her, sorry, for wanting to protect her brother, suggests to me that she feels responsible and also doesn't like feelings of guilt. So she tends to want to help and rescue people. So it does make me think that there probably is an element of rescuing going on. And spoiler warning, you will see more of that as the letter goes on. But it is safe to say she's definitely got probably a high number of what we call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, based on just that paragraph alone. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot more other stuff as well too. So on one hand, I do feel very, 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 very sorry for Louise and what she's been through because no one deserves to go through any of those experiences. And also it makes me think if the father had a proclivity for hitting, siblings, it makes me think what else did he do as well? And has he harmed Louise as well too? So yeah, that's something that comes to mind. Anyways, Matthew writes, I do think that Louise likely has a pretty good avoidant background because of her trauma. But even though I saw certain fragilities, we had a very loving, secure relationship for 3.5 years. Now, in March, she met a girl called Mylen through a role-playing game, and they started hanging out. This girl obviously had psychological problems because my girlfriend would stay up late saying she had to help her through some issues or dark thoughts. So, to me, that's sort of like linking it a little bit with what was going on with her brother. I feel like there's that rescuing codependency thing happening here. Matthew continues, when I suggested that befriending someone with severe psychological problems might not be the best thing for her, my girlfriend flew off the handle, saying I had no right to judge and that it was none of my business. Projection. Mylen was part of a group of three friends, and in June, two of them happened to have birthdays. As a result, Louise was gone 3 weekends in a row. While this really upset me because I felt deprioritized, I also felt happy that she was expanding her social circle, and so I assumed it was temporary. Oh no. And I think with regards to avoidance stuff, so again, I know because I've read this. To me, this is the start of her starting to space out and deactivate and look for other people and places to try and, get away from the building intimacy between you and her. She was at the height of her intimacy with you in Feb, where she'd given you that 10-page letter. And it seems to me like this was the beginning of the end, where she's starting to find ways to distance herself from you. Looking back, I realized she'd become more and more withdrawn. At the time, I didn't recognize it, but in hindsight, she seemed addicted to her phone and laptop. On July 8th, she went out with her friends and didn't come home, saying this girl was having a crisis and that she needed to be there. The next morning, she came home in a state I'd never seen before, completely hysterical, unable to speak or form coherent words. She kept saying that if this girl killed herself, it would be her fault for not being there enough. I was in bed at the time because it was still early, and the only thing I could think to do was to call her mum so we could try and calm her down together. We did ultimately calm her down, and Louise insisted on going to work. However, when she came home, she went straight to bed and didn't want to talk to me. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on here. I'm going to work my way from the bottom up. Coming home and not talking to you suggests to me she's incredibly shut down and does not have capacity to speak with you. Secondly, it sounds to me like she was in a really bad state leading up to this. And it also makes me think, too, that she's taking way too much accountability for her friend's emotional dysregulation. And once again, she obviously feels like she's responsible for her life. So we can see that for Louise, she does suffer quite a bit from codependency. And it does seem like she does take a lot of responsibility for another person's well-being. And again, that could relate very much to what happened with her brother or similar instances as well, too. So she definitely has a bit of a fixer stuff to her. Sorry, she has a side of her that likes to fix and to rescue. The next morning, she woke up at 6 a.m. Now, bear in mind, she normally gets up around 8, she normally gets up around 8, but on this morning at 6, she said she had to go to work early to catch up on training videos. This made no sense at all, so I sent her a message later saying it was obvious she was avoiding me and that we needed to talk because it was very hard for me to see her in such a state. Well done. She replied later saying she was going to see a psychologist and that we could talk later. However, there was no later because she was hospitalized for suicidal thoughts and ended up spending the next 2 weeks in a psychiatric ward. I knew she had body confidence issues stemming from the sexual assault when she was a teenager, as well as a previous suicide attempt at around the same time. However, in the 3.5 years we'd been together, she had never expressed any dark thoughts. The night she was admitted, we didn't know where she was because she wasn't answering her phone, and I became convinced that she might have killed herself. We eventually found out that she'd been transferred to a hospital further away than we had thought to search. Okay, wow. So I have a lot to say to this. To me, it really sounds as though for Louise, I wouldn't be surprised if she's done everything in her power to get away from those dark thoughts. And when you're getting closer to a partner and intimacy is building, it is very easy for those shameful, dark thoughts to reemerge and for inner critic voices to start saying things like, you're not good enough for Matthew. When he finds out about you, he's going to get rid of you. If you stay with him, this is danger. He's going to reject you. He's going to make you feel bad. He's going to hurt you, or you're going to hurt him, and this is going to end terribly. And I think that it's interesting to see how her admission of wanting to start a family with you, or potentially sorry, she could see herself starting a family with you back in February, has now led to the complete opposite of those steps, meaning that she's gone from being at the height of her feelings for you. Now she's like completely shut down. And on top of that, too, you know, she's experiencing suicidal thoughts. So it does seem to me like something is obviously triggering her quite a bit in regards to what's been happening over the last few weeks. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's not just related to her friendship that she has with Mylen, but also likely has to do a lot with how this growing relationship, this growing intimacy is being detrimentally impacted by her self-esteem and all the trauma she's experienced from when she was younger as well, too. So I do feel very, very sorry for her and what she's been through because it sounds like it's been hell. Now, I want to make it very clear. There are some things that happen later down the line where my clemency will come to a crashing halt for Louise. I just want to say no one deserves to go through this experience. Just reading this alone, it's the first time I've read a letter like this where there has been such a presentation of such serious, dark thoughts and, behavior, including, you know, which, by the way, neither good nor bad. It's just, when we're going into a very uncomfortable place, that's where I refer to as being dark. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But like what I'm really sensing here is there's a huge heaviness to Louise's presentation that is not something that I've seen across all letters that I've read. And so it really, I think, speaks to the volume of what she's been through and what she's carrying. So I do feel very sorry that she's even been in this position because she doesn't deserve to have gone through what she's gone through. But like I said, there are some things that she does down the line where I was like, and you really need to work on yourself now because this is not acceptable. Anyways, could only imagine how jarring this would have been for you, Matthew, though, because to hear that your partner is being admitted to a psychiatric ward where there wasn't any evidence to suggest that she had these dark thoughts or even was suicidal, that's jarring. It would be bloody painful and hard to reconcile because you'd be like, who is this person that I've even known for this amount of time, too? Especially when you were being told, I could see myself getting, growing a family with you in the future. Freaky, freaky sort of whiplash. Matthew visited her as often as he could while she was in the psych ward. He writes, she was distant, medicated, and cold. She stayed there for 2 weeks, which felt like a long time and made me think there was some deeper pathology she'd never talked about. I would agree with that. She's probably very much in her freeze response when she's doing that. So when I refer to the freeze, I'm referring to the freeze response as per the window of tolerance. So from rest and digest, fight or flight, freeze, numb, disassociated, depressed, hopeless, preparing for death. Like I could imagine she's just trying to shut everything down because it's too painful for her. I'd booked tickets to the Olympics as I live in Paris, and she was granted a leave of absence and we had a pleasant day out. Although she was on her phone a lot and seemed distant. Now, the next morning when she left, I was sad, and when she asked why, I told her it was because the last time she left, she hadn't come back for 3 weeks. I also told her that I had been feeling a bit replaced recently, and she responded with something strange, where she said something to the effect of, I'm sorry you were able to feel that. Okay, so this is where some of that dismissiveness is starting to come through, where she's obviously, coming at you with the whole, I'm sorry you feel that way. And it's not really proper empathy. And it's obviously clear that she isn't really, I don't think she has the capacity to really take on board, what Matthew's experiencing. This is where things become murky because obviously Louise has been through tremendous amounts of trauma. But this is where I would argue it just seems to me like Louise does not have it in her to meet Matthew where he's at and even consider the damage that it's now starting to have on him based on her understandable unresolved trauma. This is where I feel like, you know, it's one thing to distance yourself from a relationship, but it's another thing entirely not to also acknowledge how that distancing can really hurt your partner as well too. And even though she's obviously gone through, hospitalization, been through a psych ward, like I get all that. But we can't neglect the fact that even with that, there has been a pattern of avoidance that's been happening in and around this as well too, that's detrimentally affecting the relationship. Louise insisted on returning to the hospital, and 3 hours later, she FaceTimed me to say, here we go. She FaceTimed me to say that she no longer had feelings for me, that she was a lesbian, and that this girl, Maylen, had made her realize their relationship was unique, and she said she had nothing more to say on the matter. Okay, this is where I say, fuck Louise, because this is just not okay behavior. As a gay man myself, um, there are ways to come out, and most of them shouldn't involve, this sort of thing. Like, it's one thing to come out to homophobic people who can't accept you and love you for who you are. That's one thing. It's ideal to come out to people who can totally embrace and accept the parts of you that are who you are, your sexuality. But it is a thing entirely to come out to a partner who's doing their best to love and connect with you, who you yourself have said, I love and connect with you. And you've also said, I can see myself having a family with you, only then to pull a few months later, I'm actually a lesbian and I don't want to discuss this, even though you've been in a relationship for 3.5 years. No, actually, you do need to discuss this. And that's actually such a cop out. Like, okay, wonderful. If you've discovered your sexuality, great. But it's not an excuse to not have the capacity. Well, actually, let me change that sentence again. It is not an excuse to impact your primary partner in this particular way. And I can understand the logic forming where people will be like, well, surely it's better for Matthew to know because wouldn't he be so much better off being with someone who could actually give him what he wants, especially if I'm not able to meet his needs sexually explicitly? Well, Matthew later goes on to say, in the 3.5 years, Louise had never mentioned any interest in women, and we also had an amazing and very fulfilling sex life. I was completely flawed, and it made no sense to me at all. See? So the other thing too is that even if she was deeply in the closet, okay, like there's that aspect. I just want to say, I don't even think, I'm going to say this as an assumption. I actually don't think she's a lesbian. I think what's probably happening is that she doesn't have a very good sense of identity and she doesn't have a good sense of self. And the reason I say that is because people who tend to be codependent have poor boundaries and also have a problem in that they tend to blur their identity with another person, not sometimes intentionally, meaning that if you're someone who doesn't have a strong sense of self and you're pretty much just allowing yourself to float through life, where you tend to merge with other people. The danger is that you really lose a sense of your own well-being and who you are, and you tend to take on the interests and likes and fascinations of other people far too easily. We should be influenced by people, which should allow ourselves to obviously be merged to a degree. But if we're blending in too much to another person and taking on all their emotional stuff, then we lose sight of who we are. And if we're constantly like changing our identity post adversity, like if you've gone through a breakup and you see that that person's like cut their hair, changed their look, they look like they're a completely different person now, it can suggest that they don't actually have ways of dealing with the intense pain inside of them. So they look to almost become a new person to banish that chapter of their life out of existence. And we see that a lot with fearful avoidance who lean dismissive because a lot of them don't have a strong sense of self because of a lot of the trauma they've faced. And so that's why I'm like, I don't think she's a lesbian. What I think has probably happened is she got too emotionally close with Maylen. And I think what happened there, because of the intensity of that experience, is she believes, and I imagine she was rationalizing this as she was shutting down from her relationship with Matthew, that perhaps the reason she was feeling no longer interested in Matthew, and she's feeling so closely connected to Maylen, even though this is a trauma bond with Maylen, is because she's a lesbian. And I don't actually think she is a lesbian. I truly don't believe that. I think what is happening here is just a trauma bond that's happening on the side. Anyways, let's continue. And also I want to say, Matthew, I am really sorry that you've received this because, again, shell-shocking information. It's pretty intense to have that. I mean, it's really rough to have that sort of thing being said to you. So I'm sorry that you've had that. Anyways, Matthew writes, to be completely clear, I completely get that some people do come out during a relationship. And whilst obviously I wouldn't be happy about it, I could have understood. What bothers me isn't her choice to leave, which is her right, but the complete lack of empathy whilst doing it and the complete lack of explanation. Yeah, I completely agree. I also don't think she had any particular internalized homophobia that would cause her to be extremely troubled by a different sexual orientation, as she has gay and lesbian friends, and it was never any issue. On my side of things, whilst I find it surprising, it wouldn't have been something I would have ever judged her for that would warrant extreme stress. Yeah, well, I mean, the fact that she just didn't even want to discuss it suggests to me she was totally, again, in the freeze. She wanted to get out. She didn't want to, have any conversation with you about it because that would have put her on the spot and made her feel terrible about, doing what she was doing. So this is very much par and par for like, avoidance sort of discard sort of stuff that we're seeing. I hate that term, the avoidant discard, but people do feel discarded off the back of these experiences because of how it makes them feel. And that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, having someone just rapidly come out like that and evacuate a 3.5 relationship the way that Louise did, you would feel discarded, you'd feel banished, you'd feel completely, you know, abandoned by someone who supposedly cared about you. I arranged a meeting with the hospital psychiatrist because I felt she was being isolated and behaving very erratically. In front of the psychiatrist, she denied breaking up with me and said I must have misunderstood. She refused to discuss the events that had led to her hospitalization and insisted everything was fine and that she would be discharged soon. Interesting. So I've got a bit of gaslighting going on now. 2 days after leaving the hospital, she came back home and then left 3 hours later. I had friends visiting for the Olympics, but she didn't even wait for them to leave. She gave no explanation, said she couldn't talk about it, and acted as though it was none of my business. She was completely emotionless. It was like talking to a robot. I left for a few days, giving her the opportunity to take her things if she wanted to. When I returned, all traces of her were gone, even our photos. It was as if she had never lived there. Yikes. I'm sorry you've gone through that. I've actually heard of cases that are like that, and it's horrific because it can make you feel like, you've just been completely like hacked out surgically from this experience with a lover. And I think it really does again speak to the way in which a lot of these dismissive leaning, fearful avoidance, which is very, I find like it's not quite the same with the dismissive avoidance. Like, yeah, they can do, like, it is similar, but I feel like fearful avoidance go to such lengths to just box you away in such a ruthless manner when they're wanting to push you away that can be characteristically different from dismissives who I find more just want to sort of like exit the scene. They're not willing to necessarily go to like savage lengths to just hack you out of their lives, so to speak. In fact, often I find every single avoidant attacher will still want to keep, a hold of you because they don't know how to let go properly. But fearful avoidance, oh my God, it can be brutal to be on the receiving end of those that are on the severe end of the spectrum. Anyways, we had a vacation to Amsterdam booked in September because we'd been considering moving there. I decided to go anyways because I had friends there. During the trip, she messaged me saying she regretted everything and realized she was psychologically compromised. She said that she was worried that if she left this girl, the girl would kill herself and she would feel responsible. She later explained that this girl had told her that if Louise didn't love her like she loved her, she would have no reason to live, which is obviously emotional manipulation. And here Matthew says it's disgusting, to which I agree. I said that I would wait until the end of the year and give her time to get help. Okay, so what I find really fascinating about this, which again is characteristic of dismissive leaning, fearful avoidance, is it seemed like, after the separation, she decided to turn back around and also acknowledge that she wanted to reconnect with you and also admits that, you know, she's been in a very codependent relationship with Maylen. So yeah, it does this is saying a lot to me about the fact that, you know, she's come out of that shutdown episode and started to realize what she's done. But it doesn't seem like she's taking much accountability for what's going on. She's almost blaming Maylen for what's happened without realizing, but I also was responsible for allowing myself to get that close with this girl in the first place. And I wouldn't be surprised if Maylen had such a hold on her because she's experienced, it's a combination of things. If she's probably feeling like a bad person, being with someone like Maylen would have been, an absolute trap for her. What I mean by this is when we have recurring themes of feeling like I am unworthy, I am unlovable, I am a bad person, I am not good enough, I am not this, it is so easy to be taken advantage of by narcissistic individuals, people who are very emotionally manipulative, because we feel like we don't deserve better, that we have to work hard for love and be with people like this. So I do think that it's very easy to see how Louise would have gotten herself so enmeshed with a person like this, and it wouldn't surprise me if she's had some experience of that growing up as well too. Anyways, Matthew writes, long story short, she eventually left Maylen after about 3 weeks, and it was supposed to be two, but she said that if Lisa left her, then she would go and stay with someone who had allegedly sexually abused her. Basically, every time Louise pulled away, Maylen introduced an element of risk to herself as emotional blackmail. Yeah, this is like pretty bad. I mean, I can't tell what's going on with Maylen in terms of her personality, but it definitely seems to me like she's incredibly needy, dependent, and she is very controlling and manipulative. During this time, while Louise was navigating this relationship with Maylen, she would treat Matthew like a hidden mistress. She deleted, Matthew's writing, she deleted my number because Maylen would have gone absolutely nuts if my name was mentioned. This was incredibly hard for me because I had always given Louise complete freedom, and now she seemed trapped in a controlling, coercive relationship. Nevertheless, I put up with it because I believed her when she said another suicide attempt by Maylen could set her back significantly if they ended things badly. Yeah. Oh, dear. Eventually, we found Louise a therapist who she got along with, and the therapist suggested she live neither with me nor Maylen, but go back with her mum to work on her identity and her sense of self. I completely agree with the therapist. She moved back in with her mum and told me she now understands it was not her place to stop this girl from harming herself. She also said she was certain she wanted to rebuild our relationship and that I was the man of her dreams. The work she was doing in therapy, she said, was so we could have a healthy and secure future together. Okay, I want to take a moment here to say I could understand why a lot of people would feel very optimistic upon hearing that. But can I make a point just to say that just because she's telling you this, and this is a trap that a lot of fearful avoidants get into. Fearful avoidants, I find for the most part, are bloody smart people. They've had to outworm difficult situations throughout most of their life. And I'd find that for a lot of them, they understand the concepts of trauma and understand the concepts of emotional manipulation, but at a conscious level, not a subconscious emotional level. So even though she's saying, I understand that this isn't okay, that that Maylen is problematic and I need to stop in order to make this relationship work with Matthew, I want to jump in and say, I don't think she understands it at an emotional level because you can't work through that until like way down the line. And some of you might be like, well, what do you mean way down the line? Like, why is that? The reason is because people need to feel comfortable to go inside of themselves emotionally. And we often have a lot of protective mechanisms that prevent us from going in. Denial, inner critic, what if monster, etc. And when those things are still hyperactive, then we can still be very emotionally drawn to these experiences. And that's why I think for Maylen, she gets it conceptually, but I don't think she really has integrated that into her system. And so there's probably for want of a better phrase, probably she has an inner child that still thinks it's her duty to look out for people like this. And it's interesting because there's another part of her which is saying she wants to rebuild your relationship as well too. So much for her being a lesbian. Because if she truly was a lesbian, she wouldn't want this. And so, I mean, at least if she wanted to just be your friend and just keep it purely platonic and be like, I'm officially a lesbian and I don't want to continue this romantically because that's not what I'm into, that's one thing. But it really speaks to what that therapist was saying and what I was saying earlier, which is she hasn't got a clue about her identity. And that's why I think it was very easy for her to assume she must be a lesbian, because I don't think she actually is. That's my assumption. She might be bisexual, but I doubt she's a lesbian. Anyways, one weekend, she stayed with me for the first time in months. We had a lovely time watching Christmas films. However, that night, Maylen attempted suicide, and I thought that it was complete manipulation again. Louise went to see her and didn't return until 3 in the morning. I told her I couldn't keep living like this and that she needed to make a choice. She said she understood and was 100% sure she wanted us to rebuild our relationship. Now, I know what happens next, but I just want to say, firstly, good on you for making that ultimatum because that's a very healthy thing to do. What I find very interesting about these sort of situations is that usually that can cause the avoidant attacher to feel a lot of shame. They feel controlled, they feel trapped in these moments because even though it's the right thing to have told her, they don't like feeling like a bad person. And this can also trigger that I'm not good enough wound inside of them to make them feel like, oh, Matthew is going to do much better if he's with someone else. He'll find someone better for him. And I think for someone who's dismissive leaning FA, it sort of, can make you feel like a terrible human being. And you're just like, it can make you have a lot of anger inside of you and project that onto your partner, being like, they're making me feel like a bad person. I don't like the way they're making me feel. And they can sometimes assume you're the one being emotionally manipulative when you're not. You're just setting a very hard line. It's not a, I mean, I wouldn't even go so far as to call it like, I'm debating as to whether I want to call it a boundary. I suppose it is a boundary, but it's like a very hard line boundary. Like it's not the sort of boundary you want to be giving, on day one. It's sort of the thing that you would appropriately do when you've been like, we've had, this is like third times you're out sort of moment, if you will. And Matthew, you've put up with enough shit by this stage, so I'm so sorry you've had to go through this. Anyways, 2 weeks later, Louise went radio silent for 2 days. Then, via WhatsApp voice message, she broke up with me, saying I had put too much pressure on her by wanting clarity by the end of the year. She said she wanted to move to another part of the country. I later found out she was apartment hunting and May Lennon had insisted on going with her. To be left for someone who seemed so emotionally abusive was devastating. She flew off the handle in an email saying Maylen was never the problem, and that since I didn't understand what had happened, I could keep my closed-minded ideas to myself. Since wherever she goes, Maylen is also there, including picking her up and dropping her off to work. She seems to have no autonomy. Whereas in our relationship, we were very free, and I'd be really happy to support her in any interest she had by herself or with me. I find the contrast appalling. Yep, it's disgusting behavior. And it goes back to what I just said a minute ago, which is she's making it out like you're the problem, Matthew. You're the reason why she was feeling so pressured. The relationship was your fault because of your closed-minded beliefs about things. Where have you shown any evidence of being closed-minded? You haven't. This is completely projection from her. And I feel like she doesn't want to take any accountability. But let's not forget, she broke up with you via a WhatsApp voice message. How pathetic is that? Like it really just shows, how cowardly she's behaving right now, and it's so not okay. I understand she's gone through a lot. She's a victim of many, many different experiences, but many people who've also suffered, all forms of abuse don't end up always behaving quite like this. This is so unhealthy behavior. And frankly, Louise needs to come with a warning attached because, for herself especially too, because in a way, she's at risk of almost being what I would call a people junkie, meaning that she's almost, I can tell she absolutely did connect with you emotionally. And I think she did feel tremendous love and appreciation for you, Matthew. And I don't think there's anything wrong with you as a human being. It sounds to me, sorry. We all are perfectly imperfect. But what I mean to say is there's no evidence here to suggest you've done anything unreasonable towards her. Um, and I suspect, even that 10-page letter, she's absolutely been very much into you and has truly thought about building a secure relationship with you because she felt it. However, I think that right now there is a major part of her that just wants to get out of here and not feel like such a bad person that she's pushing you away quite violently. So yeah, she needs a lot of work on herself. And the reason why I also say she's a bit of a people user is because, if she's only using you, sorry, she's not intentionally doing this, but I think if she's going in for emotional connection and not realizing she's actually not able to build a proper relationship with people. And she also gets swayed too easily by these very codependent people who take advantage of her. Then she's not actually got any sense of autonomy for herself. And she's actually at extreme risk of being abused by people who get too close to her, who take advantage of that guilt and shame inside of her. So that's where I say, she's as much a risk to people like yourself as she is at risk herself from potential abuse as well. It's a tragic cycle for everyone involved. Anyways, Matthew writes, I asked if we could meet for dinner and talk. She agreed, but then cancelled. Instead, she came by to drop off her keys, stayed for about 6 minutes and showed no emotion and refused to let me speak. Again, she's in the freeze. She doesn't want to take any accountability. I get the impression someone was waiting for her downstairs because she seemed so impatient. It felt like talking to a completely different person. After months of sleepless nights trying to support her, she gave me no closure. I suspect she had stopped seeing her therapist and taking her medication because I couldn't fathom her behaving so coldly otherwise. No, it may not even be about a medication or seeing a therapist. It could literally just be a case of, close contact with you, but it's just too painful for her. And, she was trying to shut down a lot of her feelings of shame and guilt over what was going on. So it could be in that as well, too. But I think this is speaking to how dysregulated she is. She may have quit her therapist and her medication, trying to rationalize, I'm not the problem, he is. Because sometimes that does happen. So it could have been. Anyways, in a way, this final meeting made me realize that Louise was seriously mentally unwell, yes, and there was no relationship left to save. I agree. It's deeply upsetting because her behavior over the past 6 months is the complete opposite of the loving, caring, and supportive woman I know. For context, I'm a wheelchair user, and she'd always been unbelievably dedicated to me in our relationship. I can only think that meeting Louise awakened, sorry, I can only think that meeting Maylen awakened some deep, unresolved trauma within her that she simply couldn't process. I've never seen anyone as distressed as she was that morning in July when Maylen had said that she was attempting suicide. She's since completely avoided me, even going so far as to come into our building to take herself off the rental contract without telling me. It's really hurtful. She and this girl are moving elsewhere, and it's like the last 4 years of our relationship don't exist. Yeah, it's brutal. And can I just say, for anyone interested, I know a lot of people feel like, in this case, the Louises of the world don't care about you when they do this, that they simply just don't give a shit about you and they never have, they never will. Wrong. Someone to evacuate that hard and fast like that suggests that it was too painful for them and they're doing everything in their power to shut that down because they're in such pain that they can't handle it. So it's like essentially becoming the walking dead and just doing whatever you can to just not feel anything. It's a pretty brutal experience. True indifference doesn't look that hectic, hard and fast. I'm like excommunicate and stab you out of the memory books of my life, so to speak. It doesn't work like that. This is someone who just cannot handle the pain of what's happened. And it's so not okay to people like Matthew to be on the receiving end of this. I've realized there's nothing more that I can do and I deserve better. Because she gave me no closure, I've done a lot of research on trauma, attachment wounds, discarding, trauma bonds, and related subjects. I've come to understand that her behavior really has nothing to do with me. Even her mum says I did everything I could. She barely speaks to her mum either, which is shocking because they used to call each other daily. Wow. Suggests to me that even her mum probably doesn't approve of what's going on. And similar to a letter I read a while back, it sounds to me like she's just running because she can't face what's happened. I now find myself single at 33, whereas I thought I'd be engaged this year and married next. While I know I'm lucky this happened now rather than after we had children, it's still the worst experience of my life. In spite of knowing that it isn't my fault, I have no idea how to move on because I do still worry for her well-being with a manipulative partner. And to be honest, with the wheelchair I'm in, I had issues before dating, and this was my first real long-time girlfriend at 29 years old. So a part of me feels so intimidated to have to start all over again, in spite of the fact that I have lots of friends, run my own business, so I'm not at all socially isolated. But thank you for reading, as it does provide me a lot of comfort knowing that you're able to process this with me. Matthew, you're very welcome. I want to take that moment just to state, you being in a wheelchair. I can understand why that would be not only a barrier for a lot of people in dating, but also possible sources of embarrassment, shame, not feeling good enough as well too. Because when you're not able to, physically function the way the rest of society can as well too, and if you are dating someone who's in a wheelchair, it does present its own unique set of understandable complexities when it comes to the kind of life that you can have with a romantic partner. And I think that when it comes to, you know, your situation, Matthew, I can understand this being your first girlfriend, being an experience where it was at the start phenomenal for 3 years straight up until the end. That's freaky as fuck. Like, it's really very scary to have that experience because it could probably put you off dating forever because you'd be like, I don't know if I can trust anyone if they're not going to behave like this again. I want to make it clear, you know, you can learn to trust yourself and also to recognize these sort of things down the line. Like that happens over time. But I will say, you definitely should take the time to lick your wounds off the back of this and to heal because this is so painful. And I understand, worrying about the future and also what might come next. Because it does seem like, in spite of having a lot of good stuff, planted on the ground, you got your friends, your business, it seems like you actually have a pretty active social life from the sounds of it. It can still be very, very, very scary to go through this and to feel like a lot of hopelessness around dating again. And this can apply to anyone, regardless of whether they're, in a wheelchair or not. It's just to say that it can be hard to find the joy, the motivation, and the optimism to be in to look for a partner when you have betrayal off the back of an experience like this. Like it's truly horrific. In any case, I want to just close here. Matthew, thank you for sharing this with us. This was brutal. You didn't deserve it. It's terrible. I'm really sorry you've gone through this. And I very much look forward to continue letter reading in the rest, sorry, in next week when I return to work for March. But I did want to take the time just to read this again because I thought I want to do this a bit more with a bit more sensitivity and to also just share my renewed thoughts and feelings on it because, man, you didn't deserve what happened to you. Like, this is so bad. And again, I do feel sorry for Louise in a way because she didn't deserve what happened to her. And could you imagine, like, being someone like her where she hasn't got a good sense of self? When they say heaven and hell are a place on earth, I could imagine it would have to be hell for her right now to live with all that guilt and shame over what's happened. And I know she'd live with a lot of guilt and shame and regret because of the experiences that she's gone through prior to being with Matthew, but still, we have choices in life about how we handle our adversity, things we've been through, and I'd rather not add to my pile if I can afford to. So yeah, just to say, really brutal experience for everyone involved, but especially you, Matthew. All right. Thank you. If anyone's interested in submitting a letter, they're booked out until like I think about mid-June. So if you want to pop in, I recommend getting in now while the seats are still hot and you're not waiting for months in advance. If you want to skip the queue, you can always get your letter read privately or like this with a team member of mine, and you can choose who you want to get it read by, and it's the same rate. Otherwise, thank you very much, and I look forward to doing more of these again in March.